Hey, what's up, y'all? Christopher here, and this video I wanted to make to share how Christ saved me and share my testimony because, like all of us, I'm a deeply flawed individual and I've suffered in my ways living this human experience, right, in this fallen world. And we're living in a time where so many of us are suffering and struggling in deeply spiritual ways, but especially in America and the West in general, we live in a culture that discounts the spiritual reality of this world. We get trapped into limiting our understanding based on what we perceive with our five senses, despite science telling us that our five senses only perceive a sliver of reality. And so I wanted to share this because, again, Christ saved me and he can save you. So again, my name is Christopher. I'm 40 years old and I come from a broken home. Now, that's certainly not unique to me, and there are many wonderful, wonderful things about my childhood. I don't want to discount any of that, but I suffered a lot of hurt as a very young boy. And as a result of that, I began expressing the desire to take my own life at around 4 years old. It was around 12 that I made my first attempt to take my own life. And that sent me on this path of a lot of pain and suffering because naturally my parents needed help. What they were trying to do to help me themselves wasn't working. And so they sought professional medical treatment. And of course, in America, we absolutely operate from a pharmaceutical paradigm. And the result of this was me being placed on dozens upon dozens of different medications over the course of my life, none of them really providing me much relief, but certainly many, many side effects that only exacerbated my issues. Various things like being completely dissociated from reality, sort of viewing my life as a movie that I wasn't even a participant in, having physical symptoms like tremors and shaking, the inability to get an erection, various things like this that just really harmed me more than they helped me. And what hurt the most was that these medical professionals, these doctors, these highly educated men and women told me that their solution was the only solution. They operated from this limited paradigm and it never felt true to me. It never felt complete. I argued against the chemical imbalance theory as a very, young man because they're claiming I had this chemical imbalance, this physiological, neurological condition that could never be cured. Now, they weren't able to take any sort of a physiological test. So despite comparing it to things like diabetes, which does have a blood test to confirm, they simply expected me to accept this sort of paradigm, this sort of view of things as though it were true despite any lack of evidence. And we know from a meta-analysis that was done, I believe in July of 2022, that looked at, I don't even know how many different studies that were all looking to prove the serotonin theory of depression. They all came up short. Not a single one of them conclusively proved that those of us that deal with depression and suicidal ideation, have low serotonin. Now, I could go into, a long diatribe about the amount of profit that has been made off of SSRIs and peddling this lie about the serotonin theory of depression, but I don't think that's really helpful. And so to kind of continue my testimony, again, it was around 12 when I first made that effort to end my life. And I did so in a way that wasn't actually going to end my life, but it did cause me physical harm. And of course, I spent some time in a psych ward to kind of get myself well enough to go back home. And then fast forward till 16, and things got a lot more dark. I began drinking, and the first day that I ever drank, I got blackout drunk. I finished an entire bottle of bourbon, and funny enough, I never drank bourbon the rest of my life, although I drank quite a bit over the rest of my life. But what's even more interesting about, me drinking in that way the first time I ever drank, a clear indication to anyone that I should not be consuming alcohol. To me, it was the perfect solution. It was an immediate end to this mental anguish, this existential dread that I suffered under. But of course, it has lots of long-term consequences. And in this life, when we seek this immediate gratification or this immediate alleviation of suffering, we start stacking up long-term consequences. And the more you do this, the more these long-term consequences total up into an inevitable crisis. And so, again, at 16, I then utilized a method that has taken people from this life. I went to the ER. I had my stomach pumped. I ended up having multiple seizures as they attempted to help me. I was in ICU for, I don't really remember how long, but I was having all kinds of hallucinations. In the immediate aftermath, I was unable to, I lost motor control. I could barely walk, but I couldn't control how I was moving. I wasn't able to speak. And still to this day, I have my language gets a little bit twisted around. I mix up words sometimes. I invent words, if you will, that don't exist. And it's been, a hurdle that I have to kind of have an awareness of and seek to overcome as, I seek to communicate and articulate the thoughts in my mind and the feelings in my heart. And, 16, these early ages, all of us, we all suffer in unique ways as we begin individuating from childhood into adulthood. But again, because of the nature of my childhood and my upbringing and my interpretation of it, which is the key component. It was my interpretation of my parents, those around me, the world, and what it meant that I was alone. It was me against the world. Now, my parents do love me, and I'm eternally grateful that they do, and that they always have, and that they always will. But I didn't feel it. I wasn't able to understand it. My father had sole custody, and I had limited visitation with my mother. She was a teacher, and so it would be on, like spring break or Christmas break, things like this, that we would visit her. For a good chunk of my early childhood, she had lived in another state. And so when my brother and I would move between houses, I always kept my stuff in a suitcase. I never unpacked. I never put it in the dresser or in the closet. And both of my parents didn't like this. They didn't understand why I did it. But again, it was because in my mind, I didn't have a home. I didn't have a family. I just had people I lived with. And naturally, obviously, as you can assume, I'm having these existential thoughts, these depressions, these issues with addiction starting to brew and starting to grow, and it didn't make anything better for me in this life. I had all kinds of issues in school. I was identified as an intelligent young man at a very early age, But again, because it was me against the world, I took that to mean that I could pull one over people's eyes. I could deceive people in order to get what I wanted out of them. And that obviously caused a lot of suffering. I had a lot of issues in school, especially early on, with, different confrontations with teachers. I was never, I don't think I would ever call myself a bully, but I was a fierce defender of the principles that I held and had no problem intensely engaging others in verbal and at times physical confrontation. Now, as I grew beyond 16, again with my issues in school, I leaned more and more into alcohol. I got into marijuana, I got into psychedelic mushrooms and various other drugs that I was able to get my hands on, because to me, this physical reality wasn't at all what I wanted anything to do with. And I needed an escape. I needed to get out of it. And so, whatever you had, I was willing to try it. I was probably going to try it some more. Excuse me. So, naturally, what preceded or what followed with these troubles in school was troubles with law and troubles with my relationships. I wasn't the type of boy and the type of man to the women that I pursued and the women that I dated that I should have been. I wasn't always faithful. I wasn't always loyal. And I didn't view women as the beautiful creatures that they are. I didn't cherish them. I didn't respect them. And this, again, caused lots of pain and heartbreak, not just for them, but for myself as well, because my dad did a fantastic job instilling a moral framework within me. He made it a point to raise me in the Lutheran church. But as soon as I was confirmed at 16, I left the church and I walked away because, again, with my intellect, again, with this material world that we live in and this paradigm of the sort of three-dimensional reality, it discounts all things that we can't perceive with our five senses. And so I leaned on that, and I used all kinds of different rhetoric to dismantle religion and to attempt to use logic to show how stupid and foolish those with faith were. Now, after high school, of course, many of my friends, many of my classmates all kind of went out to the various universities that they were going to continue their education and ultimately pursue their careers and build families and do the things that all of us are called to do, that are good for all of us to do. But that's not what I was doing. I was seeking hedonistic pleasure. I just wanted to party. I just wanted to have a good time. I figured, again, this life, I looked at it as sort of a prison, sort of a hell itself. And I figured, well, if I'm in hell, I might as well have a good time. And, my drug use expanded. I was trying more and more different things. And the drinking really, really, really ramped up. I went from, partying every single weekend to partying every single day to ultimately drinking alone and by myself. And somewhere around, I want to say it was around 20 years old, give or take, I made another attempt on my life. And this time I had attempted to have the police do it for me because, of course, while we are, physical and fragile, and there's ways to end our lives. We have a built-in survival mechanism, and of course we do feel pain. And so I was afraid of that pain, and I didn't know how to necessarily overcome that survival instinct. So I figured if I get myself loaded, I hop in my car, I start driving around the highway, I call 911 and I make a bunch of threats, they'll come do it for me. Well, by the grace of God, for some reason, they weren't able to find me and pull me over. They even had an officer nearby my apartment who somehow missed me as I came back home. And so I ultimately, after driving around for however long I drove around, went back to my apartment and went to sleep. I was then woken up the next morning to a soft voice saying, "Wake up, Christopher." And I had an assault rifle about an inch from my forehead. My entire apartment was filled with SWAT team. Because one of the things I had said was that I was going to end the life of the person you're not allowed to ever say you'll end the life of, if you're picking up what I'm laying down. And so again, I'm dealing with law enforcement, I'm placed in a psych hospital, and I'm starting again to try to rebuild myself, despite wishing that I had succeeded in ending myself. Each time that I've done this, I've then had some moments of clarity, some moments of grace. I've had plenty of fun times and happy moments over my life, but the undercurrent theme has always been a depressed, existential angst stemming from not loving myself because I couldn't interpret the love of others in the way that I needed to. And so I was always seeking information as far as how the world exactly had sort of screwed me over and set me on this destiny of suffering. And I ramped up again my drug and alcohol use. I like to joke with people that if you've ever seen the movie Leaving Las Vegas with Nicolas Cage, I made him look like a lightweight. Now, for a period, I was relatively high functioning as an alcoholic. I'd been elevated to leadership positions in many of the employment I had, although most of my jobs were relatively short-lived because, again, while lucid, I could conduct myself in a affable and I could conduct myself well, and I could do things well. I could work hard, I could be conscientious, I could be, fun to be around and charismatic. But I always had this pain that I was masking. And so when I wasn't working, my days off were just benders, and when I was managing a restaurant that provided me with the opportunity to really be a functioning alcoholic in a different way. I could open the restaurant and make myself cocktails after having a few beers in the shower. Throughout the day, I could sneak into the liquor room, take a shot, and just kind of keep this buzz throughout the day, top it off at the end of the night, and just get blacked out, wake up, do it all over again. I was also chain smoking cigarettes like crazy. About a 2-pack a day habit that I ultimately had from about 18 until 35-ish, 36, something like that. I'm probably about 4 or 5 years removed from smoking at this point. I had more relationships. I ended up hooking up with a waitress at the restaurant that I managed, and that ultimately ended my employment there because, of course, that's not professional, that's not responsible, that's not what you should be doing. But we got pregnant and ultimately had a miscarriage. Now, neither her or I were fully developed, fully actualized. We each had our own demons that we were fighting, but I had thought that this was the woman I was going to marry. I developed a great relationship with her young daughter, And I thought this was a family that I was going to be building. And so it really devastated me when we lost our child. And then ultimately that breakup hurt me really deeply. Now, after that breakup, that had kind of confirmed in my mind that I was destined to live this life of absolute suffering. I was never going to find a woman who loved me. I was never going to have a family. I was just going to suffer until I died. And so again, I leaned into hedonism. I leaned into pleasure. I leaned into partying. I began really using drugs, especially psychedelics, in a harmful way. I sought that escape much more frequently. And again, with this mindset that I had of just kind of screw it, I allowed myself to get evicted from an apartment and just kind of went to music festivals and just had a good time with things, with not concerning myself with any sort of responsibility. Thankfully, psychedelics are very powerful. And even if you don't set the right intention, you will be taught things about yourself. And I'm not endorsing the use of psychedelics. And I'm also not chastising those who have used them as tools for personal development. What I'm simply saying is that I was using them in a very unhealthy way. But despite using them in an unhealthy way, they were working on my mind to open myself up to truths. And, bad trips, while incredibly uncomfortable in the moment, did provide me with the most profound and deepest lessons over time as they ultimately integrated with myself. Now, again, after getting evicted, what I decided to do, because I had a friend who, for different reasons completely, he was a very outgoing, happy, charismatic dude who loved life. But he was up to get out of Wisconsin and kind of explore the country. And so we embarked on a road trip, and, we stopped in Colorado for a little while and ultimately landed in Las Vegas and lived there for a spell. Now we both went out, and of course Vegas is Vegas, right? We gambled, we drank, we did drugs, we partied, we snuck into all kinds of different places. It's it's interesting where you can get to, with like a yellow vest and walking confidently. I digress, but ultimately I hit a point in Vegas where, again, I didn't want to be in this earth anymore. And so I attempted to take my own life again. I made up a lie so that my friend wasn't going to be at our apartment and was staying with a woman that he had been seeing, and did something that could have seriously harmed and killed other people. I thought I was being safe with it. I thought I was doing it in a way that was only going to hurt me, but ultimately was saved by a hero who pulled me out of the fire. And from there, of course, I go to ICU, significant damage to my lungs, which I still deal with today. Slowly but surely, my lungs have been getting much, much, much better. But part of the reason why I use the moniker dim cough for, my music production is because I've got this dim cough, right? Anyway, I'm in ICU for a while after being in the emergency room for a while, and then I'm in a psych ward for a while. And then, much to my surprise, I go from the psych ward, instead of being released, I get taken to Clark County Jail because I'd been charged with felony arson. So there I am sitting in Clark County, which is not a fun county jail. Not to say that any county jail is fun. I've been to 3 different jails in 3 different states, but Clark County it's kind of its own animal, as you can probably understand, because people from all over the world go to Las Vegas, get up to no good, and ultimately a lot of them get in trouble. I mean, one of the sort of the phrases or slogans that I heard was, you go to Vegas on vacation, you leave on probation, you come back on revocation. And I spent some time in solitary while I was there. I had to deal with some individuals that certainly were seeking to harm me. I had to protect myself, and it wasn't good. But my parents, they didn't know how to protect me. I was thousands of miles away, or excuse me, almost 2,000 miles away from my father and hundreds of miles away from my mother. So their fear was, if they simply bailed me out of jail, what was I going to do to myself? In their mind, at least in jail, I would be safe. And ultimately, I was safe despite threats and things of this nature, and having to protect myself in the ways that I did. But this has also reminded me to take a quick step back. I'd gotten a DUI right around 21 years old, 21 or 22. That was my first one. I'd also, for a period, I had moved down to Arizona with my mother for maybe a year-ish. And after coming back, I then got another DUI. Now, in a divine way, it was 1 year and 1 day after my first DUI. And so based on the laws, this significantly lessened the punishment I received. I still had to go to jail, but it was for less time. It was lower fines, lower loss of license. I was able to do work release, these things. Ultimately, after being in Vegas, once I did finally get released on bond, after being bailed out, after working with an attorney, I did move to Arizona to be with my mother because that's where I was closest to. And having grown up with my father in the home, it's what I personally desired the most, was to spend time with my mother. And I began selling cars. I had a lot of success early on because I'd gotten to a place where I knew I needed to stop drinking. I knew I needed to better myself, and I knew I needed to establish my life. And as things tend to happen, this success breeded arrogance. It inflated my ego. You know, I think it was my second month, I was the number one salesperson, having never sold a car in my life. And I rarely wasn't the number one salesperson. Quickly, they moved me into a management role. I was the closer, so when the salesperson couldn't get the deal done, I was the guy who came in and ultimately got that handshake and sent those wheels over the curb. I ended up working with a general manager, a mentor of mine, and I followed him to several dealerships, including him starting his own dealership. But I was, again, struggling with my own demons. And so after he left that initial dealership and went to another dealership where I was going to follow him as one of his desk managers, I ended up getting a DUI. And you're not allowed, there's certain things, especially with the car industry, there's drug testing and things like this. And so I wasn't able to take that position. I had to go to jail. I had to go to Tent City in Arizona, in case you're familiar with that. And it's a outdoor, open air incarceration situation. And that devastated me. The reason I got this DUI that forced me to go to Tent City was because, again, on my days off, I would just get loaded. And unfortunately, one of the things I really used to enjoy doing was driving by myself, sort of exploring things while drunk. I might generally be around the town, or I might drive all the way across the state and just come back home. This is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. And I'm very grateful and very lucky that I haven't had more issues. Despite getting 3 total DUIs in my life, I had the one accident. I slammed into 3 vehicles at a red light, and thank God, nobody was seriously hurt. Nobody was killed, because that would have broke me in a way that I don't know if I would have recovered from. And I also would have hurt people in a way that they never would have recovered from. I would have hurt their families and their friends in ways that they would struggle to overcome. And this DUI, I don't remember. I don't remember the accident. I remember waking up in jail. I remember being told what had happened. I remember seeing my car when I went to the impound to get my stuff from it. And I wondered how I was alive. But that DUI, it shattered this delusion that I had. Because I'd always told myself that I was a good person, that I was only harming myself. And if you try to tell me to stop, be gone. This is my life. I'm gonna do what I do. But again, having done what I did, I knew that if I kept going, I was going to hurt other people. And so I had this desire to quit, but I still had this deep compulsion to drink. And by God's love, God's grace, God's justice, God's mercy, He changed the way that my body interacted with alcohol. I immediately, upon trying to drink after getting out of Tent City, would feel ill while drinking, and I would get flashbacks to moments in my life that I had blacked out. Embarrassing things I had done, shameful things I had done, harmful things I had done. And this developed this deep, deep sense of self-loathing that was far greater than any hatred I ever had for myself. Having a mother who had struggled with alcoholism her whole life. In fact, one of the synchronicities of my life is that first day that I ever drank and I got completely loaded was the day that she had relapsed after, I want to say, around a decade of sobriety in another state, hundreds of miles away. Unbeknownst to me at the time, unbeknownst to her at the time. She's now sober, and I love my mother deeply, just to put that out there. But she's been sober for many, many years. But it was after this DUI and after these experiences of trying to continue drinking that I began white knuckling sobriety. Because I had gone to AA meetings with her as a child, and even some when I was in a treatment facility after the experience trying to have the police take me out. Now, this is where I entered the darkest period of my life, because I was convinced that I was so evil and such a danger to other people that I needed to be in solitary confinement. Now, of course, I wasn't actually in jail, but I could confine myself. And so I would go to work, I would be social with the people at work, but I made zero efforts to make any friends, to have any relationships. I intentionally always made up excuses why I couldn't go to some sort of after work function or anything like this. I chose to be alone. Ultimately, that spiraled to a point where I had an outburst of anger, which rage has always been sort of my emotional deregulation that has come up. But I had this rageful moment at a dealership I was working at, and they fired me. And after they fired me, I had decided I was just going to live off of my savings, continue to isolate from the world, never leaving my bedroom. There was a light bulb that went out at one point, and I didn't change it for over a year. I would just sit in darkness. Um, and I also began starving myself. I I was too afraid of trying to take my own life from the pain that I would have to experience in order to end it. And while I had become an atheist as a young man, the use of psychedelics turned me into went from atheist to agnostic to spiritual, but in sort of an occult way. I explored, many traditional faiths and practices, but I also explored darker practices, darker forms of spirituality. And I decided that I was going to, try to harm my body as well as I could. And even if I couldn't take myself out today, I could take years off the end of my life. And so one of the ways in which I did this was by starving myself. I'm a 6'3" tall man. I currently walk around at about 215 pounds, but I got down to about 125 pounds. I was very frail looking. I was very frail in general. Of course, I was sedentary. I didn't exercise, and I was smoking like crazy. While I wasn't doing drugs at this time and I wasn't drinking, I was abusing marijuana beyond belief. It was medically available and then ultimately became recreationally available and still is in Arizona. And so the ease of access was there. And marijuana had always been sort of this companion of mine over the course of my drug use. And I held on to this belief that it was harmless. I even deluded myself into thinking that it was purely good, that it had all these medical benefits and there was nothing wrong with using it. But that's not actually true. And, let me know in the comments if you'd like me to go deeper into my experiences with a marijuana addiction and a marijuana abuse. But again, I'm living this very unhealthy life. I'm sober off of alcohol, but I'm miserable because I'm isolating from the world. I stopped brushing my teeth. I mean, I would go weeks, if not months, without brushing my teeth. I've got some dental issues, severe dental issues as a result of that. Had all kinds of cardiovascular issues. I I don't know. I don't know if I ever actually had a heart attack, but I've had several moments that absolutely felt like I was having some kind of a heart attack. And in this darkness, I then again came to the conclusion that I would need to end my life. Thankfully, despite estranging myself from my parents and going very long stretches without talking to them, especially my dad, because he's a very masculine man and he never understood addiction and mental illness on a personal level. And so he couldn't understand it in me. And we butted heads aggressively in my youth. And I couldn't, despite always wanting my dad to be proud of me, always wanting him to love me, which he always did love me, I just didn't feel it. I didn't want to talk to him. And so I didn't talk to him for long periods of time, well over years probably. But thankfully, they were still in my life. And in this dark period, after becoming homeless, they ultimately got me to check myself into a mental health facility to try and get back to myself. And I'm forever grateful to this particular facility because while I had so much rage inside of me and had so many issues with that particular facility, there were so many amazing and caring people in that facility that despite their handicaps based on various rules and regulations of that industry, really helped me. They really helped me see things from a different perspective and reframe various events in my life. And that got me to hike for the first time since I was a little boy, kind of with Boy Scouts. And growing up in Wisconsin, now living in Arizona, I had always loved mountains and began hiking around them. Again, and this was around the time that I quit smoking cigarettes. So my cardio was awful. And again, I was so low weight, I didn't have the muscle mass. I was just not in good shape to be hiking. But from the very first hike, I knew I'm gonna do this a lot. I absolutely, absolutely loved it. And so I kept slowly but surely building up my cardio, building up a little more muscle mass. I focused in on my hydration. I ate cleaner foods and began meditating much more seriously. I had started meditating probably around 16 or 17 as I was beginning to explore different faiths and traditions outside of Christianity that I was raised in. But I never really was too serious with it. But at this point in my life, I got serious with it. And I had tremendous benefits. Again, hiking, I've made several videos talking about kind of the neuroscience behind why hiking is so beneficial for mental health, aside from the benefits of physical health. And meditation, of course, is well studied and well documented as far as the benefits of that. And one day I had this impression that I was supposed to really focus on nasal breathing because, again, our noses, they've got filtration, climate control, things like this. We're supposed to be breathing through our nose, but it's too easy to get stuck in sort of this mouth breathing mode. And so what was impressed upon me was take a swig of water, hold it in your mouth, and begin this hike up a mountain to this cave on the side of the mountain. And this was this mountain that I could not tell you how many miles and how many hours I've spent around, up and over this mountain. I love this mountain, and I've made videos of it. It's Pass Mountain, aka Scarface. Anyway, so I began hiking, and I had set some rules for myself. I was not allowed to take a break. I was not allowed to stop completely. I would simply have to modulate my pace. I could go as slow as I wanted, but I needed to keep moving and keep climbing up this mountain to this cave while holding the water in my mouth and only breathing through my nose. And of course, I'm in Arizona, and this was in the summer months. It was hot. I did a good job for quite a while, but I ultimately hit a point where I needed to sit down. I needed to take a break, and I swallowed the water, and I'm breathing heavy, leaned over my knees, and I'm looking around. I've got a great view. I wasn't at the top yet, but I still had some elevation, and it was this beautiful view, and I'm enjoying that. And I look over to this rock, this kind of green covered rock, and I saw something on top of it. I couldn't tell what it was. And I'm sitting there, sort of this wonderful peace that's kind of coming over me with this hike and with this exertion and with this view that I'm taking in. And I'm wondering, what am I looking at? And as I'm thinking that, the lizard that I was looking at turned its head and faced me. And in that moment, I entered, I guess, what I'll call this timeless space. And in that timeless space, God spoke to me. He revealed himself to me. It's the Greek word theophany that I had experienced. It was like God said, peekaboo. Everything made sense. Not just in my own life, all of these dots being connected, but in the world. And that was a truly profound experience that I sometimes forget I had, even to this day. But I draw upon it often, and I try to remember it often. I had an experience with psychedelics where I felt like God revealed himself to me, but it was easy to dismiss that as, part of a trip, right? But on this hike, I was completely sober. I was completely lucid. There was no confusion. That was God revealing himself to me. Now, some people could dismiss this as psychosis or something like this, but you will never convince me that's what it was. And so I continued this path, and I fell backwards. I stumbled. I certainly wasn't my ideal self, and I got caught up. I was working a job delivering packages, and it was a great job because, again, it allowed me to keep moving my body. I was probably putting on about 15,000 steps every day. I'm lifting packages, I'm loading my truck, I'm getting some physical exercise, and I didn't have to deal with customers really. And certainly not in the way that I did in restaurants and sales environments where I needed them to like me. I needed to try to get them to tip me or to buy something from me. Everybody basically is happy when they receive their package, right? It's like, hey, I wanted this thing, you got it for me. Hey, that's fantastic. And so it was just, I was in my truck all day, listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks, jamming out to music. And for the most part, it was pretty good, but there was also frustrations with it. I mean, it's not fun delivering in apartment complexes, especially if they don't have a mail room. Traffic in a metro city can be pretty not fun to drive around in a big truck. And, you don't get paid very well either. So I should point out too that I had been renting a room in people's homes instead of paying for an apartment. So I also had that added uncomfortability of not having my own space really, and having to keep relationships with people that I didn't know and, to be honest, didn't really care to have a relationship with. But I continued this path of hiking, ultimately doing some pretty cool hikes, which again I've got videos of. Doing the entire Superstition Ridgeline hike, running a 50K ultra marathon, the only race I've ever done aside from playground races, right? I was 2 years after I quit smoking, I ran that 50K, which, just a quick aside, we are all so much more capable than we think we are. But one night on Saturday, on a full moon, my last package to drop off it put me in this beautiful place to see this view of the Superstitions with the full moon shining down on them. And I took a picture, which I've shared on some of my platforms. And it wasn't a good day. It was a day that I was really filled with a lot of bad thoughts, a lot of existential issues, just a lot of anger about my station in life. And I go home again by myself, because the more time you spend isolated, the easier it gets to stay isolated. And it was difficult for me to find places to put myself to meet new people. And so I'd gotten real comfortable being alone. And so I just kept to myself all the time. And so I'm alone in my apartment and doing whatever it is that I'm doing, probably watching something on YouTube or whatever. And I got a call from my mother about 10 o'clock at night. and she had told me that that my brother Matthew took his life. And that broke me. Up until that point, I hadn't cried in decades. I'm sure, as a little boy I did, but I very much bought into men don't cry. And so that was part of why my rage developed so much, because that was the emotion I could use to protect myself from those tears and from experiencing that. But that phone call, I remember feeling like I got sucked into this dark tunnel. Serendipitously, my best friend from childhood, who still lives in my hometown with a beautiful family, was down here in the Phoenix metro where I live, helping his brother move back home. I think he had only ever been here one other time. It was so serendipitous. And so he, instead of helping his brother move, he helped me. And we went on a hike, and we went to my mom's house. Well, the hike was after going to my mom's house. But anyway, and the three of us spent time together. I mean, he made us food, and he just, I can never thank you enough, Greg. He really stepped up for me that day, and for my mother, and beyond that day as well. But ultimately, we fly back to Wisconsin for my brother's funeral, which my dad, always this emotionally resilient rock, took care of all funeral planning. And we're in Wisconsin, and I'm just raw emotionally. I had immediately had it impressed upon my mind, I need to find a way to make sure my parents don't bury both of their children. But I didn't fully know how to do it, because despite making all kinds of progress, I still wasn't happy with myself. I still didn't love myself. And so we bury my brother, and I come back to to Arizona, and I'm all alone in the apartment I still live in, this tiny studio apartment, because despite having having seasons of my life where I made really, really good income, I had that period of my life where I just lived off of my savings over the course of years and dwindled it down to nothing, and then worked jobs like delivering packages that didn't pay me enough to reestablish myself and to build up a savings. And so I leaned into meditation more seriously than I think the vast, vast, vast majority of practitioners ever have. I would sit in meditation for hours at a time. And I cried. I cried so much. Unfortunately, my family, we weren't very good at taking pictures, and so I've got a very limited number of pictures of my brother, but I'm grateful for the ones that I have. And I've got an album on my phone with a video from Christmas of 1995 with my brother, and the pictures that I do have. And when I wasn't meditating, I would sit and I would go through that album to remember and to just feel everything. Because again, being a practicing alcoholic for so many years, I didn't know how to feel feelings. And so I had to learn this, I had to do this, and I had to release these things. And there was one day in that meditation my eyes completely closed. I would use a sleep mask to block out the light and listen to either binaural beats. That was pretty much all I was listening to, is my own made binaural beats, utilizing like solfeggio frequencies and things like this. And this white light came, and I heard my name, and it was Jesus. He spoke to me, and he told me things. And then he removed my suffering, and he replaced it with peace. There's no other explanation that I've ever heard from anyone that can explain how in that deep grief I could have found peace. But I had peace. And that's when I changed my stance. Not just on being agnostic, but on knowing God is real and that Christ did die for me. Later, I had further encounters with him. One of the other most significantly profound ones was experiencing his suffering in Gethsemane, where he suffered all the pains of everyone who ever has and ever will live, bleeding from every pore, alone, with his disciples falling asleep, unable to stay awake for even an hour to pray for him. And that converted my heart. I gave myself to Christ on that day, in these moments, but I didn't have a church. And I was raised Lutheran. I don't have any negative memories at church or with any of the people that I interacted with there. But again, I had fallen away and became an atheist, and I developed all of these opinions that weren't even true about the Lutheran faith. But I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to the Lutheran church. And so I was exploring Catholicism and Orthodoxy and other, forms of Protestantism and, these different branches of Christianity. But for whatever reason, I kept seeing the Latter-day Saint faith presented to me in different forms. Growing up in Wisconsin, they have a very small Latter-day Saint population. I had no knowledge. I obviously had heard various things here and there from pop culture that are not true, but whatever. I had heard these various things and never explored it further. But delivering packages, I had a different route. I wasn't in the same neighborhoods all the time, but I kept being put, not just by various Latter-day Saint buildings, but around Latter-day Saint people. After my brother's death, I had worked with a life coach who's a member of the church. I had worked with a therapist through one of the telehealth services, who I ultimately found out was a member of the church. I would get messages from various things, all these things pointing me to it. And so I reached out to the missionaries and began taking lessons. And the first day I walked into my ward, into my church that I call home today, I knew it was true. I felt the Spirit so fully, so lovingly, so comfortingly. And the absolutely amazing people in my ward welcomed me with open arms. They showed me love, and I felt it. And that then led, after a period of investigation, right? I had decided I was going to get baptized, but after I made that decision and I publicly told the missionaries and we set a date for it, I then began getting attacked spiritually. And all kinds of things, all kinds of thoughts and feelings were coming in my mind that were making me question the experiences I had in meditation with Christ. I couldn't deny them, but I didn't know why I was getting all these things happening. And the missionaries told me this was something that happens pretty commonly. And so I stopped taking lessons, and I again leaned into my meditation practice. And these attacks, they were defeated, and I proceeded with my baptism. And that was roughly a year and a half ago at this point. Again, not knowing anything about the faith, I've since then explored and studied, reading scripture, of course, the Book of Mormon, but also the Bible. I had never read the Bible. I had heard various verses here and there. Obviously was familiar with, different stories from the Bible growing up in the church, in the Lutheran church, but I never read the Bible. I never read the Word for myself. And as we know, the Word is alive, and it speaks to you. And so, continuing to read my scriptures, to meditate, to go for walks, to develop, daily practices that help, listening to conference talks, these things, it's truly nourished my soul. But I still, I'm a baby Christian. I still have fallen backwards. I still fall into temptation, despite my best efforts at times. I had a really dark period of time around the holidays in 2024. Having experienced those, without my brother and being a little bit removed from his actual suicide, I was so lost in grief, I was basically just numb in 2023. But in 2024, it was enough time had passed to really feel his loss in a much deeper way. And so I had stopped going to church, I had stopped praying, I'd stopped reading scripture and doing things that had been working for me. And again, things got dark. But thankfully, my ward family wasn't going to let me live in darkness. They began reaching out to me, coming to my apartment, knocking on my door, calling me, texting me. Then I went back to church. And then even in 2025, I again fell into darkness, struggling to do the practices that work for me. I recently had a manic episode where, while I was, back going to church, back reading scripture, back doing these things, I had allowed myself to stop being grounded, and I had spiraled out of control. And in this video, I'm not going to go into the specifics of what happened. I don't know if I ever will. Maybe I will. But I ended up in ER, ICU, and a psych ward. Roughly maybe a week and a half total between all of those places. One of the aspects of this manic experience was not sleeping for several days and running many miles. And I got rhabdomyolysis. My body was breaking itself down and releasing toxic proteins that could have shut down my liver and killed me. But thankfully I'd got brought into the hospital and they helped me. But then after that experience, because one of the, I guess now I'm giving some details of it, but one of the things that I had done in this manic episode was began letting go of attachments. And one of the attachments I had was the very little amount of money that I had accumulated. And so I just began giving it away, all of it away. I didn't want to end my life, but I had this deluded idea that I didn't need any of it whatsoever. And so I would give it to people. I would just drop it behind me as I was running so that people could find it. And after getting out of the hospital, I entered a depression again, because now here I am with nothing. I still have my tiny little apartment. I no longer had my possessions that I had let go of. I no longer had the money. And one of the things I had done when I went out on this several day, no sleeping, running experience, sleeping in the park and things like this. Well, not sleeping in the park, but I would take, maybe like 15-minute meditative rests periodically. One of the attachments I have is my cat Bud. And so I had left my apartment a crack open because I didn't want him to just suffer and die in this apartment. I gave him, I put all the food out, and I turned my faucet on so there was a stream of water coming out so he could drink water. And I had prayed, keep him safe. But I then come back to my apartment after being in the hospital, and I don't have him anymore because he, of course, had left the apartment. But that's another beautiful piece of my testimony is the first thing I did when I came back to my apartment was look for him. I'm walking around the complex, I'm walking around the neighborhood, and I'm not seeing any cats whatsoever. And I'm very discouraged. I had gotten him microchipped when I had him neutered, but I couldn't find the paperwork on it. I couldn't get in touch with the vet to figure out how to work with the microchip company to actually try to track him down. And I was struggling. And so I pray. And I had prayed while I was in the hospital that he would be safe and that I would find him and be reunited with him. But I was praying, and then that evening, right around 7 o'clock, I felt the prompting, go look for Bud. And I walked outside, and I go to the parking lot, and I saw several cats, and one of them looked to have Bud's markings. I couldn't quite tell because it was dark. Not fully dark, but it was dark enough that I couldn't quite tell. And so I began moving towards him. I'm like, Bud, is that you? And he would run away a little bit, and he'd look back at me. This cat that I didn't know if it was Bud. And then somebody was coming home from work, because obviously it's an apartment, lots of people live here. And they're coming home from work, and that startled him, and he took off running like around a corner and outside of my eyesight. And I went around the corner to find. Okay, ran out of phone storage, had to transfer it to my computer, so I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. But as I was searching for Bud, and he had ran around this corner, and I couldn't see where he was, I just kept going in that direction, just diligently, intently. And I'm kind of looking in bushes, and I'm looking in various places that a cat might run to hide. And I'm just walking, and I walked directly to him in one of the stairways. And he was sitting there in the corner, kind of huddled up and scared. And I saw him, he's on kind of like the landing from the ground, like halfway between the ground and the balcony, or the catwalk, or whatever you want to call it. And he sees me, and I see him, and he immediately starts meowing. And I'm like, Bud, is that you? And he comes towards me, and I pick him up, and it was clearly Bud. I know my cat, and he's just loving on me, I'm loving on him. And it was just such a amazing feeling and amazing evidence of the Holy Spirit guiding me. It was God listening to my prayers to not only keep him safe, he was alone, for again, roughly a week and a half. And he was safe. And he was back with me. Because again, I live by myself. I'm not dating anyone. I'm not trying to date anyone at this point. I mean, if I meet the woman I am to marry, I'll obviously pursue that, but I'm not prioritizing, finding her at this point. It's my belief that God will lead her to me and me to her, and it'll happen when it's meant to happen. Because there's other things in my life that I need to prioritize right now, so that I can be the type of man, the type of husband, ultimately, ideally, Lord willing, the type of father that I want to be. But that helped me so much to find him. And so I just wanted to share my testimony, because I'm committing to myself and publicly, and this helps hold me accountable to that I will never again forget to pray. I will never again forget to read scripture daily, to listen to leaders, to truly practice my faith, to exercise that muscle. Because while my belief never went away, again, because of the experiences I've had in this life, there's not a person on this planet who can ever convince me that God is not real and that Jesus did not die on the cross. Those things are 100% factually true, and true with a capital T. But my faith, again, I'm still developing those muscles. I'm a baby Christian, and just like, babies in mortality, one of the beautiful things is they literally need to fall, just like we did, just like Adam and Eve did, so that they can get back up. Because it's the process of falling and getting back up that develops their leg muscles so that they actually can walk. And that's what I'm doing. I'm looking to walk with Christ for the rest of my life. And I just want to put this out here. I'm not sharing this testimony to, necessarily change anyone's mind on anything. I'm not trying to, actively, convert you to my faith or to my church, but I want to share this because this is my experience, and this is what has happened to me and how Christ saved me. And I know that if he saved me, he can save you. And so obviously I ran out of phone storage because I've been recording this video for a while now, and I don't want to make it longer than it needs to be. But there's so many people that I really am so grateful for beyond words. But I'm going to name a couple of them here. Every missionary I've met with, that I've gone on lessons with, has been amazing young people. I am so beyond impressed with the young members of our church. They're so smart, articulate, full of joy, full of wisdom, full of knowledge. But the first two missionaries I met with, and I'll edit in a picture of me and them at my baptism, Elder Dahlgren and Elder Leafty. Elder Dahlgren is the one who baptized me. If you ever see this video, you young men saved my life. And I will be eternally grateful for the time we spent together, the lessons we had, the talks, the conversations, which has reminded me of one other thing that I should note. Part of the Latter-day Saint faith is we perform baptisms for those that are on the other side. Now, contrary to popular belief, and I'm not well versed enough in the doctrine and everything like this to be sort of an apologist for the faith. So I'm not trying to, argue or debate or anything like that with people. But one misconception that those outside of our faith have is that we're like forcing people into something. That's not at all how it works. We perform an ordinance, and then we believe that these people on the other side that have passed away from this earth have that choice of whether to accept the baptism or not. And so the first person I baptized was my brother Matthew, because he's the biggest loss I've ever had in my life. And that night I had a dream where I awoke in the morning after him and I, as little boys, like little boys playing outside with our shirts off, and we were hugging each other. And I woke up crying because he was comforting me. And he let me know that he's always with me, and that he had accepted his baptism. And that's another moment in my life that I draw upon, because not only did Christ save me, but he saved my brother as well. And so, I don't know, leave me some comments as far as any aspect of my story you maybe wish me to make more videos on. I'm still trying to find my footing with this channel. We're obviously, we've got 79 followers, and I love you guys. I am so grateful that you care about my story, and that you care about the things that I talk about, and that you're interested in it. But I'd love to, dive deeper into, all kinds of aspects of my faith and of my conversion and, mental health. And I don't necessarily know what people really want to hear from me. If you want to hear more of sort of my understanding of neuroscience or meditation or hiking, if you want me to talk more about crypto, if you want me to do more music, which is another thing I've recently changed. I've transitioned my moniker. I had an amazing, uplifting Father's Day weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday were just, all of those days were just so uplifting to me for various reasons. And so I made the decision to change my musical focus. It's always been, I started plucking around on the computer making sounds back in the late 90s. Wasn't really too diligent with it until later in life, and I've had various stretches of proliferation of my sounds, but it's always been very experimental, very explorative. It's me not only learning how to do it, but also just kind of exploring my mind, exploring my emotions, and working through things. And so the music has always been very much for me. And most people who've listened to many of the songs I make, they don't really resonate with them. But I've made the decision to rebrand myself musically from Dim Cough to Exalted, because I am, and you are as well. Through Christ, we are exalted. And my musical focus from here on is going to be making music that uplifts others. And so you can find the link in my link tree to the SoundCloud page. I just have one song on there, the first one that I've made. But I'll be making many more, ultimately get onto Spotify and things like this. But for now, it's just gonna be SoundCloud because it's free and that type of thing. But I just want to share all this again because this is my testimony. And again, I know the struggles of this world. I know what it's like to deal with, addiction and depression and suicidal ideation, anxiety, to lose someone you deeply love in a tragic way. I know what it's like to hurt people you don't want to hurt. I know what it's like to, lose a child in pregnancy. I've been in really dark places that some of us will never be in, but many of us have been in. And I know many people have been in many worse places in their life, many darker places. But if you look for testimonies out there, you will find people that have gone through the most horrific things who walk around today with peace and joy in their hearts. And if it's available to them, I assure you it is available to you. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, so we'll call that good. I appreciate you always, truly. Thank you, and we'll talk to you oh so soon. Peace.